The year was 2387, and humanity had only been part of the galactic conquered for 12 years. To the ancient species who ruled the stars, humans were nothing more than curious children who had somehow figured out how to travel between worlds. They were tolerated because the rules of the conquered demanded it, but they were never respected. How could they be? The elder races had built empires that lasted for thousands of years. They had seen countless species rise and fall like waves on a cosmic shore. Humans were just the latest arrivals, barely worth noticing. Commander Lisa Morgan stood in the great assembly hall of Prime, the station world where the Galactic Concord held its meetings. The chamber was enormous, designed to hold representatives from over 200 different species. Strange creatures filled the seats around her, some with scales, some with feathers, some with bodies made of living crystal. The air smelled different in each section of the room, filtered to match the needs of each species. Lisa felt very small standing in the center of that vast space, but she did not let it show on her face. She had come with a purpose, and she would not leave until she had spoken her piece. 3 of our colony ships were attacked 6 weeks ago, Lisa said, her voice carrying through the translation systems that filled the chamber. The vessels were traveling through neutral space, harming no one. They carried 43,000 civilians, including 12,000 children. They were taken by forces of the Dominion. A murmur ran through the assembly, but it was not a murmur of outrage. It was more like the sound of mild interest, the way someone might react to hearing about a minor traffic accident in a distant city. High Arbiter leaned forward in his seat. He was an species that had been part of the conquered since before humans learned to make fire. His body was covered in a hard shell that gleamed under the chamber lights, and his mandibles clicked together when he spoke. The Dominion has not violated any conquered law, said. The attack occurred outside conquered jurisdiction. This is an internal matter between your species and theirs. Lisa felt anger rise in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. We are not asking the conquered to fight our battles. We are here to deliver a formal warning to the Dominion, witnessed by this assembly. This caused more interest. Warnings were rare. They carried weight in galactic politics, at least when they came from species powerful enough to back them up. Ambassador stepped forward to stand beside Lisa. He was older than her, with gray at his temples and lines on his face that spoke of many years in difficult negotiations. But his eyes were sharp, and his voice was calm in a way that made some of the alien delegates uncomfortable, though they could not have explained why. The warning is this, said. The Dominion will return our people within one standard galactic cycle. Every man, woman, and child taken from those ships will be delivered safely to human space. If this does not happen, humanity will consider itself in a state of total war with the Dominion. Laughter erupted from the section of the chamber. Ambassador, a massive creature covered in dark green scales, rose from his seat. He had 4 arms, each one thick with muscle, and his mouth was filled with teeth designed for tearing meat. He was an impressive sight, and he knew it. Total war, said, his voice deep and rumbling. Little mammals, do you understand what those words mean? The Dominion has ruled our sectors for 10,000 years. We have conquered species that were building starships when your ancestors were still living in caves. You have no fleet worth mentioning. You have no allies. You have nothing. He spread all 4 arms wide, a gesture of contempt among his people. Your colonies now belong to us. Your people will serve us well in the mineral pits of go home, breed more workers for us, and be grateful we do not take more. The laughter spread through the chamber. Even species that had no love for the joined in. The idea of humanity threatening war against one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy was simply too absurd to take seriously. Waited for the laughter to die down. His expression had not changed. If anything, he seemed calmer than before, and that calmness was beginning to make some of the older delegates nervous. I want to make certain you understand our position, said. This is not a negotiation. This is not a request. This is a promise. If our people are not returned, we will hunt the Dominion across every sector of this galaxy. We will not stop for treaties. We will not stop for threats. We will not stop if you burn our worlds or kill our soldiers. Our children will continue the hunt. Our will continue it. 1,000 years from now, 10,000 years from now, there will still be humans hunting. This is what we are offering you. Return our people or face a war that will never end. The chamber fell silent. Something in its voice had cut through the amusement, something that did not match the weakness the galaxy expected from such a young species. Recovered first, he bared his fangs in what passed for a smile among the, "You are amusing, human. I will remember this moment when you are digging ore for my." Lisa stepped forward. Her hand did not move toward the ceremonial sidearm at her hip, but somehow every eye in the chamber was drawn to it anyway. "You were warned," she said quietly. "Remember that. When the hunting begins, remember that you were warned," and you laughed. The human delegation turned and walked out of the chamber. They did not look back. They did not need to. They had said what they came to say. Behind them, the assembly returned to its normal business. Within an hour, most of the delegates had forgotten the incident entirely. It was simply too ridiculous to dwell on. Humans threatening it would be like a mouse threatening a lion. The natural order of the galaxy was clear, and it would take more than strong words to change it. But a few of the older delegates, the ones who had lived long enough to see empires rise and fall, did not laugh. They had noticed something in the humans' eyes, something that reminded them of other species they had known, species that had seemed weak until they were pushed too far. One of these delegates was an ancient race of energy beings who rarely spoke in council. As the assembly continued its business, the representative turned to its neighbor, a silicon-based from the outer rim. "The young ones do not understand," the said, its voice like wind through crystal. "They see only what the humans lack. They do not see what the humans have." "And what is that?" the silicon creature asked. The form flickered, a sign of deep thought among its kind. "Patience," it said finally, "and memory. Those are dangerous things to have together, very dangerous indeed." But no one was listening. The galaxy had already moved on to other matters, confident that the humans would eventually accept their place in the natural order. They were wrong. 5 years passed and the galaxy continued as it always had. The Dominion grew stronger. They took more worlds, captured more slaves, and expanded their borders in every direction. The Galactic conquered watched and did nothing, because doing nothing was what they had always done. The strong took from the weak, and the weak either adapted or disappeared. This was the way of things, and it had been the way of things for longer than most species could remember. The humans had gone quiet after their dramatic warning. Most of the galaxy assumed they had accepted reality. Perhaps they had tried to fight back in the early months, but what could such a young species really do against the war machine? Nothing, of course. They had probably realized their mistake and crawled back to their little corner of space to lick their wounds. Then the reports started coming in. The first incident happened at a mining outpost deep in the nebula. The outpost was small, just a few hundred workers extracting rare minerals from an asteroid field. One day, all communication with the outpost stopped. When a patrol ship arrived to investigate, they found the station dark and silent. Every aboard was dead. Not in battle, but killed one by one, quietly and efficiently, as if a ghost had moved through the station taking lives. On the main hull, someone had burned a message in perfect script. The message was simple. It said only, "We remember." The High Command dismissed the incident as the work of pirates, or perhaps a rival faction within their own empire. They increased patrols in the area and moved on. There was no reason to connect a single attack to the humans who had made such foolish threats years ago. 6 months later, a diplomatic convoy was ambushed in what should have been completely secure space. The convoy was carrying Ambassador himself, the same who had laughed at the humans in the conquered chamber. His escort ships were destroyed with surgical precision. The weapons used were unfamiliar, designed to cripple and disable rather than simply destroy. When rescue ships finally arrived, they found alive but changed. He would not speak. He would not eat. He sat in the corner of his ruined vessel, clutching a small data chip in his massive hands. On that chip were the names and faces of every human taken from the colony ships 5 years earlier. 43,000 names, 12,000 of them children. Never recovered. He spent the rest of his life in a medical facility, staring at walls and sometimes whispering a single word over and over: remember. They began to take the situation more seriously, but they still did not understand what they were facing. They thought in terms of fleets and armies, of territories and resources. They looked for a human military force they could engage and destroy. They found nothing, because that was not how humanity had chosen to fight this war. On the agricultural world of, the planetary governor was one of the most important figures in the Dominion. His world fed a dozen colonies and 3 military bases. He was protected by the best security they could provide, living in a fortress that should have been impossible to breach. He woke one night to find a human woman sitting in his bedroom. Her name was Cole, and 7 years ago she had been a schoolteacher on New Geneva, one of the colony worlds attacked by the. She had been taken along with her students. Most of those students had died in the first year, worked to death in the mineral pits of, had survived because she was useful. She could read, write, and do mathematics, skills that made her valuable to the overseers who ran the mining operations. For 3 years she had pretended to be broken. She had bowed her head and done her work and never caused trouble. But the whole time she had been watching, learning, memorizing patrol schedules and security codes, making contact with other human survivors, building a network that stretched across half of space, hidden in plain sight among the slaves the Dominion considered beneath notice. The governor reached for his weapon but was faster. She had always been fast, even before the pits had hardened her into something dangerous. "I have a message from humanity," she said, her voice flat and cold. "We are coming for all of you, every who had a hand in taking our people, every officer who gave orders, every soldier who followed them. We will find you. It might take years, it might take decades, but we will find you and we will make you answer for what you did." The governor tried to speak, but no words came out. He had never seen eyes like hers before, eyes that held nothing but patient, endless hatred. "You thought we would forget," continued. "You thought we would give up and move on. That is not who we are. Humans do not forget. We carry our grudges across generations. We teach our children to remember the wrongs done to us, and they teach their children. You could kill every human alive today, and our descendants would still be hunting yours 1,000 years from now." She killed him with her bare hands. It was not quick and it was not clean. When his security team finally broke down the door, they found her gone and their leader dead, with the same message carved into his scales: "We remember." Across space, similar incidents. Human survivors who had seemed broken and harmless revealed themselves as anything but. They had spent years learning language and culture. They understood how the Dominion worked, where its weaknesses were, how to move through its systems without being noticed. They had made maps of every facility, every patrol route, every vulnerable point. And they had been in contact with Earth the entire time. The human government had not been idle during those 5 years. They had built ships, but not the kind of ships they expected. Small, fast vessels designed for hit-and-run attacks, stealth technology that could slip past sensors, weapons that could strike from impossible distances and disappear before any response could be organized. They had also been recruiting every human with a family member taken by the, every soldier who wanted revenge, every scientist who could find a new way to hurt the enemy. They came from every human world, united by a single purpose. The High Command finally began to understand that something was very wrong. This was not a conventional war. There were no battle lines, no territories to defend, no enemy fleet to engage. The humans were everywhere and nowhere, striking without warning and vanishing like smoke. A general named was given command of the response. He was considered one of the best military minds in the Dominion, a veteran of a dozen campaigns against other species. He studied the human attacks for months, trying to find a pattern, trying to understand the enemy's strategy. In the end, he wrote a report that was classified at the highest level and never released to the public. In that report, he said something that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. "We are not fighting an army," wrote. "We are fighting a species. Every human everywhere considers themselves part of this war. They do not distinguish between soldiers and civilians, between official actions and personal revenge. To them, it is all the same. The attack on their colony ships was an attack on their entire species, and their entire species has responded." He concluded with a warning that the High Command did not want to hear. "We cannot win this war by killing humans. There are too many of them and more are born every day. We cannot win by destroying their worlds because that will only make them hate us more. The only way to end this conflict is to give them what they want, return the survivors, make whatever amends they demand, and pray that it is enough." The High Command ignored his recommendation. They were the Dominion. They did not surrender. They did not apologize. They did not bow to species they considered inferior. That decision would cost them everything. 20 years had passed since Commander Lisa Morgan delivered her warning to the Galactic Concord. In that time, the galaxy had learned to pay attention to humanity in ways it never had before. The war between humans and they was no longer a joke. It was a topic of serious discussion in diplomatic circles, military academies, and scientific institutions across known space. High Arbiter was old now. His carapace had lost its shine, and his movements were slower than they had been when he laughed at the human delegation all those years ago. He did not laugh anymore when humans were mentioned. Instead, he found himself thinking about them often, trying to understand something that seemed to go against everything he knew about how the galaxy worked. He requested a private meeting with the current human ambassador to the Concord, a woman named. She was younger than the representatives who had come before her, but there was something ancient in her eyes, a weight that seemed to belong to someone much older. They met in a small conference room, far from the Grand Assembly Hall, had specifically asked for privacy. This was not a conversation he wanted others to hear. "I have watched your species for 20 years, said, his mandibles clicking softly. "I have studied your tactics, your strategies, your decision-making, and I still do not understand, so I am asking you directly, why do you continue?" Tilted her head slightly. "Continue what, Arbiter?" "This war, this endless, pointless war." His voice held genuine confusion. "Your species has lost millions of lives. Your economy is strained beyond what should be sustainable. You have spent resources that could have been used to expand, to grow, to become truly powerful among the stars. Instead, you pour everything into this conflict with the why." Was quiet for a moment, considering her answer carefully. "Do you know what a grudge is, Arbiter?" "I am familiar with the concept," said. "It is a temporary emotional state following an offense. A period of anger that eventually fades as the individual moves on to other concerns." Shook her head slowly. "That is not what a grudge is for humans. For us, a grudge can last forever. It can be passed down from parent to child, from generation to generation. We have fought wars over insults spoken hundreds of years ago. We have maintained feuds for so long that everyone forgot what started them, but the hatred remained." She leaned forward in her chair and found himself leaning back slightly, an instinctive reaction to something in her manner that his ancient instincts recognized as dangerous. "They took our people," said. "They took 43,000 civilians who were doing nothing wrong, traveling peacefully through space that belonged to no one. When we asked for them back, they laughed at us. They called us amusing. They said our children would be their slaves. Her voice remained calm, but there was something underneath it that made Shell itch with discomfort. Our children will be many things, Arbiter. They will be scientists and artists, soldiers and builders, dreamers and leaders. But slaves? Never. Not while a single human draws breath. And we will not rest until every who had a hand in what happened has answered for their crimes, and every human taken has been either returned to us or properly avenged. Try to process this. In his experience, all conflicts eventually ended. Resources ran out. Populations grew tired of war. Leaders changed and new priorities emerged. The idea of a species that would fight forever, that would pass its hatred down through generations like a sacred inheritance, was difficult for him to grasp. "This is not rational behavior," he said finally. "No," agreed. "It is not. That is exactly what makes it effective." She stood and walked to the window that looked out over the station. Stars filled the view, thousands of points of light representing countless worlds and civilizations. "They are rational," she continued. "They think in terms of costs and benefits, advantages and disadvantages. When they took our colony ships, they calculated that we were too weak to respond effectively. They assumed that eventually we would realize we could not win and seek peace on whatever terms they offered. That is how rational species behave." She turned back to face. "But we are not rational about this, Arbiter. We are human. And humans, when pushed far enough, become something that rational beings cannot predict or understand. We become stubborn beyond all reason. We become patient beyond all measure. We become willing to sacrifice everything, to endure anything, for the sake of something that matters to us." Santeni twitched nervously. "And revenge matters that much to your species." "Not revenge," said. "Justice. There is a difference, though it may not be obvious from the outside. Revenge is about causing pain to those who hurt you. Justice is about making sure that actions have consequences, that wrongs are answered, that the universe operates according to rules that everyone must follow." She sat back down, her eyes never leaving. They believed they were above consequences. They believed that because they were strong, they could do whatever they wanted to weaker species. We are teaching them otherwise. We are teaching the entire galaxy otherwise. Not through speeches or treaties, but through action, through persistence, through the simple fact that we will not stop, no matter what. Was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before. "They have begun to lock their doors at night. They have learned to check the shadows, to watch for threats that might come from anywhere. Their leaders travel with massive security forces and still do not feel safe. Their empire is shrinking, their military is exhausted, and their population lives in constant fear." "Yes," said simply. "You have done this. Your species, which seemed so weak just 20 years ago, has brought one of the oldest empires in the galaxy to its knees. Not through superior weapons or larger fleets, but through sheer, relentless persistence." "Yes." Leaned forward, his ancient eyes studying space with new understanding. "What happens when this is over? When they have been defeated, when your people have been avenged, what then? Will you turn this capacity for eternal grudges against other species who have wronged you?" Smiled, and unlike the cold expression that humans often showed when discussing this war, there was genuine warmth in it. "We hope not, Arbiter. We do not want to be warriors forever. We want to explore, to create, to learn, to grow alongside the other species of this galaxy. But we needed everyone to understand something first." "And what is that?" "That we are not prey." Smile faded. "We look soft, we look weak, we seem easy to push around. But there is a line, Arbiter. Cross it, and you will discover that the soft, weak, easy humans are capable of things that would give nightmares to species 10 times our age." She stood again, preparing to leave. "To cross that line, they are paying the price. We take no joy in it. We wish it had never been necessary. But it was necessary, and so we did what needed to be done. We will continue doing it until the job is finished." At the door, she paused and looked back. The thought they could hide from us. They thought that eventually we would get tired or distracted or simply forget. They were wrong. There is nowhere in this galaxy they can hide where we will not eventually find them. That is the lesson we are teaching. I hope the rest of the galaxy is paying attention. She left, sat alone in the conference room for a long time, thinking about everything she had said. He had lived for nearly 3 centuries. He had seen dozens of wars, watched empires rise and fall, witnessed the birth and death of countless political movements. But he had never seen anything quite like the humans. And for the first time in his long life, he found himself feeling something that surprised him: respect for a species he had once dismissed as irrelevant. The humans were not prey. The galaxy was learning that lesson the hard way. 53 years had passed since the warning was given and ignored. The Dominion that had once ruled vast stretches of the galaxy was now a shadow of its former power. Their empire had shrunk by more than half. Their military, once feared across dozens of sectors, was exhausted from fighting an enemy that refused to follow any rules of war they understood. Their population lived in constant fear, never knowing when the next attack would come or from what direction. Admiral Daniel Price stood on the bridge of the carrier Persistence, watching the stars through the main viewport. The ship was the 9th to carry that name. The previous 8 had all been destroyed in combat over the decades, but each time, humanity had built a new one and given it the same name. It had become a symbol, a reminder that no matter how many times they knocked them down, they would always get back up. Today, they had come for Prime itself. The hung in space before them, a massive planet covered in cities that had stood for thousands of years. Daniel had studied images of this world since he was a child. His grandfather had died ramming a cruiser in the early years of the war, becoming one of the first human heroes of the conflict. His mother had spent 20 years designing the weapons that now equipped the human fleet. His own children had grown up knowing that somewhere across the galaxy, a debt remained unpaid. 3 generations of his family had dedicated their lives to this moment. Now, finally, it had arrived. "Admiral, the fleet is in position," said his executive officer. She was young, barely 30, but she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had been preparing for this her entire life. Her grandmother had been one of the original colonists taken by the old woman had died in the mineral pits but not before passing her stories to her daughter, who had passed them to hers. Every person in this fleet had a story like that. Every human ship, every weapon, every strategy had been shaped by 50 years of memory and determination. "Signal the other fleet commanders," Daniel said. "Begin the approach." The human fleet was large by any standard, but it was not the largest force ever assembled for a battle. What made it dangerous was not its size but its experience. These ships and their crews had been fighting for decades. They knew every tactic the enemy might use because they had seen them all before. They had learned, adapted, and grown stronger with each engagement. And they were not alone. As the human ships moved toward Prime, other vessels joined them. A battle group from the consortium, whose people had lost 3 worlds to expansion 2 centuries ago and had never forgotten. Supply ships from the merchants who had been forced to pay tribute to the Dominion for generations and were eager to see their oppressors fall. Even observer vessels from the normally neutral choir of endless song, their crystalline forms humming with frequencies that human translators interpreted as anticipation. The galaxy was watching, and for the first time in a long time, it was rooting for the humans. They fought back with everything they had. Their orbital defense platforms opened fire as soon as the Allied fleet came into range. Their warships formed defensive formations around there, determined to protect it at any cost. They knew what defeat would mean. They had seen what humans did to those who had wronged them. But determination alone was not enough. The humans had spent 50 years preparing for this battle. Every weapon had been studied and countered. Every tactic had been analyzed and answered. The defensive platforms fell one by one. The warships were picked apart by coordinated attacks that seemed to know exactly where each vessel was weakest. Daniel watched the battle unfold with a strange sense of calm. There was no joy in what he was doing, no satisfaction in watching ships burn. This was simply a job that needed to be finished, a promise that needed to be kept. "Admiral," said, her voice tight with emotion, "we're receiving a transmission from the High Command. They're requesting terms of surrender." The bridge fell silent. After 53 years, those words seemed almost unreal. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, thinking of everyone who had not lived to see this day. His grandfather, who had died believing that humanity could never win. His mother, who had worked herself to exhaustion designing weapons she hoped would never be needed. All the soldiers and civilians who had sacrificed everything for this cause. "Put them through," he said. The main screen flickered, and a face appeared. Daniel did not recognize the individual, but he recognized the fear in its eyes. It was the same fear he had seen in other faces over the years, the fear of a predator that had finally met something it could not kill. "Human Commander," the said, its voice unsteady, "we acknowledge defeat. We will accept whatever terms you offer. Please end this war." Daniel looked at the screen for a long moment before responding. "These are our terms. First, every surviving human taken from the colony ships will be returned immediately. Those who have died will have their remains returned as well, along with full documentation of how and when they died. Second, every leader who had a role in authorizing or carrying out the original attack will surrender themselves for trial. Third, the Dominion will pay reparations to the families of every human who died in this conflict, the amount to be determined by a neutral party. Fourth, the Dominion will renounce slavery in all its forms and release every being currently held in bondage throughout your territory." The scales paled. "These terms are severe." "These terms are generous," Daniel replied. "You attacked civilians. You took our children. You laughed when we asked for them back. For 53 years, you have made us bleed for every inch of progress. If I were a less merciful man, I would give the order to reduce you to ash and let that be the end of the species." He leaned forward slightly. "But I am not that man, and humanity is not that species. We do not seek genocide. We do not want to become the monsters we have been fighting. We want justice, and we want assurance that nothing like this will ever happen again. Accept our terms and this war ends today. Refuse, and we will continue until there is nothing left of your civilization to surrender." Was watching him with something like pride in her eyes. They had talked about this moment many times, wondering how they would feel when it finally came. Now that it was here, Daniel felt only a tired sense of relief. The commander was silent for a long time. Finally, slowly, it bowed its head in the gesture of submission that its species used. "We accept your terms. The war is over." Daniel nodded. "Then let it be recorded that on this day, the Dominion surrendered to the Human Federation and its allies. Let it also be recorded that humanity showed mercy to a defeated enemy, even an enemy that showed us no mercy when we were weak." He turned to "Signal all ships. Cease fire. Begin humanitarian operations. Any vessel that resists is to be disabled, not destroyed. Any civilian is to be protected as if they were our own people." Looked surprised. "Sir, after everything they did to us." "That is exactly why," Daniel said firmly. "After everything they did to us, we will show the galaxy what humanity truly is. We are not conquerors. We are not slavers. We are people who wanted nothing more than to live in peace until we were forced to become warriors. Now that the war is over, we will put down our weapons and prove that we are worthy of the victory we have won." He looked back at the planet that had been the heart of an empire built on cruelty and domination. "They will remember this day forever, not just because they lost, but because of how we won. Let that be our legacy. Let that be what the galaxy learns from this war." The Battle of Prime ended not with a massacre, but with mercy. Human medical ships helped treat wounded soldiers. Human engineers helped repair damaged civilian infrastructure. Human diplomats worked alongside officials to ensure an orderly transition. And throughout it all, the galaxy watched in amazement. The species that had been mocked and dismissed had not only won an impossible war but had done so without losing its soul. It was, many observers would later agree, the moment when everything changed. 100 years had passed since Commander Lisa Morgan and Ambassador stood in the Great Assembly Hall of Prime and delivered their warning to the galaxy. A century of change had transformed everything. The galactic concord that had once dismissed humanity as irrelevant now counted them among its most influential members. The dominion that had laughed at human threats was gone, replaced by a smaller and more humble republic that had formally renounced its imperial past. The assembly hall itself had been rebuilt twice since that fateful day, each time larger than before to accommodate new member species and the growing importance of galactic politics. The current hall could hold representatives from over 500 civilizations, a testament to how much the galaxy had changed in a single human century. Ambassador Gregory stood in the center of that vast chamber, wearing the formal uniform of the Human Federation Diplomatic Corps. He was a tall man with kind eyes and a patient manner, traits that served him well in his profession. He was also the great-great-grandson of the man who had made the promise that started everything. In his pocket, Gregory carried a small data chip that had been passed down through his family for 4 generations. On that chip was a recording of his ancestors' speech to the conquered, the warning that had been laughed at and ignored. He did not need to play it. He had memorized every word long ago, but he liked having it with him, a connection to the history that had shaped his family and his species. "We are gathered today to mark a historic occasion," the current High Arbiter announced. It was not who had died decades ago, but a younger member of the same species who had inherited the position. 100 years ago, humanity delivered a warning to this assembly. That warning led to a conflict that reshaped the political landscape of our galaxy. Today, we acknowledge the lessons learned from that conflict and formally welcome the Human Federation as a permanent member of the Galactic Council. Applause filled the chamber, genuine and respectful. Gregory accepted the recognition with a humble nod, thinking about all the people who should have been here to see this moment but were not. After the formal ceremony ended, Gregory made his way through the crowd of delegates and well-wishers. He had obligations to fulfill, hands to shake, words to exchange. But there was one conversation he wanted to have before anything else. He found the young diplomat standing near the back of the chamber, looking uncomfortable amid the celebration. The young male's scales were a pale green, a sign of submission and anxiety in his species. He had been born long after the war ended, inheriting the burden of history without ever having played a part in creating it. "Ambassador," the said as Gregory approached. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "I was not sure if you would speak with me." "Why would I not?" Gregory asked gently. The scales shifted slightly. "Because of what my people did to yours, because of the suffering we caused, because even after 100 years, there are humans who look at any and see only enemies." Gregory nodded slowly. This was not the first time he had encountered such fears. The war had ended decades ago, but its shadow still fell across relations between their species. "My great-great-grandfather stood in this very chamber a century ago," Gregory said. "He made a promise that day, and our species kept that promise at tremendous cost. Millions of humans died. Millions of died. Worlds were burned, families were destroyed, and wounds were created that will take generations more to fully heal." The young lowered his head, unable to meet Gregory's eyes. "But that war is over," Gregory continued, his voice softening. "The debt has been paid, the dead have been honored, the criminals have been punished. Your people are not our enemies anymore. They have not been our enemies for a very long time." The looked up surprised. "You truly believe that?" "I do, and I believe something else as well." Gregory reached into his pocket and touched the data chip, drawing strength from the connection to his ancestor. "I believe that the purpose of memory is not to keep hatred alive, but to ensure that the same mistakes are never repeated." He placed a hand on the young's shoulder, a gesture that would have been unimaginable a century ago. "We will never forget what happened. That is not a threat, young one. It is simply who we are. 1,000 years from now, humans will still tell the story of the colony ships, the warning, and the war that followed. But we tell that story not to keep the hatred burning, but to remind ourselves and others of what happens when one species thinks it can prey upon another without consequence." Gregory turned to look out at the assembly hall, at the hundreds of species gathered in peace. The galaxy learned something from our conflict. They learned that appearances can be deceiving, that small does not mean weak, and that patience is a power greater than any weapon. Most importantly, they learned that humanity keeps its word. When we say we will do something, we do it. When we make a promise, we fulfill it. For good or ill, we are a species that means what it says. The young was quiet for a moment, processing Gregory's words. Finally, he spoke again. "My elders told me stories about your species. They said that when they first encountered humans, they could not understand why anyone would find you threatening. You were small, soft, and seemed so fragile compared to the older races. They thought you would be easy to dominate." Gregory smiled at this. It was a warm smile, without any of the cold edges that human expressions had carried during the war years. "And what do they say now?" "They say that they were fools. They say that size and strength and age mean nothing against a species that refuses to give up." The scales shifted to a deeper green, a sign of respect among his people. "They say that humans are the most dangerous species in the galaxy, not because of your weapons or your technology, but because of something inside you that simply will not break." "Stubbornness," Gregory said with a slight laugh. "That is the word you are looking for. Humans are stubborn beyond all reason. We get an idea in our heads and nothing in the universe can shake it loose." He turned to face the young fully, his expression becoming more serious. "But stubbornness can be a force for good as well as a force for destruction. Right now, I am stubborn about something else. I am stubborn about building a galaxy where species like yours and mine can live together in peace. I am stubborn about creating a future where children do not grow up learning to hate. I am stubborn about proving that the war was not the end of our story, but the beginning of something better." The young's posture straightened slightly, his scales shifting to colors that Gregory's translator interpreted as hope. "I would like to help build that future," they said, "if you will allow me." Gregory extended his hand in the human gesture of greeting and partnership. They hesitated for only a moment before reaching out with one of his own hands and grasping it. "Then let us begin," Gregory said, "together." Around them, the assembly continued its business, representatives of hundreds of species going about the work of maintaining peace in a complex galaxy. Most of them paid no attention to the two figures standing near the back of the chamber, a human and a shaking hands. But some of the older delegates noticed. They saw the descendants of enemies becoming allies, the children of war reaching toward peace. And they understood that this, more than any battle or treaty, was the true victory that humanity had won. They had not simply defeated they had proven that even the deepest wounds could heal, that even the longest grudges could eventually give way to forgiveness. The galaxy would never forget humanity. That had been ensured by a century of determination and sacrifice. But what the galaxy would remember was not just the war, or the warning, or the price that was paid. They would remember that when given the choice between endless vengeance and lasting peace, humanity chose peace. And that in the end made all the difference.